May I first say welcome to the participants online attending to this breakout session of ReMeP 2020, which is to deal with, in my opinion, a very fascinating subject of how to assess the, let's call it, ICT impact of legislation, how to check this impact already in the course of preparing legislation. ICT has become a cross-cutting matter. Nearly all aspects of our lives are influenced by it. And so it is very obvious that even in legislation, the impact of regulatory measures on ICT has to be taken into account. But how to do it? Shall we do it by sort of a rough guess, as very often the impact of legislation still is estimated? Or do we have more precise, valid, reliable methods? And can we support this assessment by new tools? Can the new tools themselves, can the ICT tools themselves support us in assessing the impact of regulatory measures on the ICT world? To deal with this subject, we have got an introductory presentation from Mrs. Cecile Guasch, who is working for the European Commission in this very fascinating field of interoperability. You know that there is the big interoperability framework of the European Union, within which there are so many different initiatives. She's a business architect and working for this initiative. She will present to us a particular program or a particular project, how to deal with the subject that I briefly introduced. And then we have two other panelists who have a long record of personal experience in the field of legislation from parliament side and government side. There is Fotis Fitsilis from the Hellenic Parliament, who is senior researcher there and head of a department in the research service or in the scientific service of the administration of the Hellenic Parliament. He's very active in the legislative informatics field. He's teaching legal informatics at a administrative university in Athens, and very well known on the international stage too. And then we have from the Austrian Federal Chancellery, Karl Irresberger, who is the head of the department of the constitutional service of the Federal Chancellery that is responsible for legislative drafting. So he's really into the core business that we are talking about. He, for many, many years, has been responsible for the legislative drafting guidelines that are in place in Austria. And so he was also responsible for those guidelines that have been issued and adopted to check the ICT fitness, so to say, of Austrian legislation. No? Okay, you will explain to us. You know much more than me about this subject. So the program for this session is just as follows. We will start with a presentation by Cecile Guasch. Then Fotis Fitsilis and Karl Irresberger will make brief introductory statements, and then we will go into the panel debate. There will also be the opportunity for the audience to put questions. So if you would like to put questions, please put them in the chat. You see the chat is accompanying the sessions. And the editorial staff in our background will take your questions from the chat, will put them together for the final question and answer session that will be the concluding part of this workshop. So I hope this will be an interesting 90 minutes, and I warmly invite Mrs. Cecile Guasch to start with her presentation and share her screen with us.
Thank you very much. So let me open the application. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Very tiny, but it's there.
Better?
It's better, yeah.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me to present our work in the ReMeP conference. So I am working for the Interoperability Unit of the European Commission, as you mentioned, and the Interoperability Unit is in fact responsible of developing solutions, interoperable solutions for Europe. And those solutions that are now on the screen are available to all of you, exposed on a platform that is a join-up platform. And some of them are or could be of interest to you, and I'm looking at the yellowish ones in the bottom. Leos, which is an open source solution for drafting legislative text using the Acomentoso standard. The Ref2Link, that is a solution also open source for identifying URIs from references in text. And the ELI, that is also mostly known by you as the European Legislative Identifier, that is a vocabulary for structuring metadata about legislative resources. So the ISA solution has also developed, and you also mentioned it, the European Interoperability Framework, in short EIF, that is our Bible, a foundational resource for us to progress into our activities of interoperability. And it defines interoperability as the ability of organizations to interact towards mutually beneficial goals involving the sharing of information and knowledge between these organizations, and this supported by IT systems. So if you want to know more about it and you are not completely familiar, there is a link that is here in the presentation, and our Interoperability Academy is also preparing for very soon an e-learning on this topic. But as you see, we have recognized that the legal interoperability is a fundamental aspect to address when we want to develop public services. And therefore, our legal interoperability action has developed a vision that is to make legislation an enabler for smoother implementation of public policies. And therefore, our team endorsed the mission of creating a multidisciplinary community on better legislation to share good practices and co-create tools with interoperability in mind. And there you can link on the link that is proposed here to join our community that in fact is, wait, if it wants, is busy with making sure that the EIF principles are well taken into account while designing, while drafting or shaping new policy initiatives. And as we are first, so our first work has been to work on the guidelines. We have a so-called digital check in the European Commission, and we have progressed in proposing a new tool, to a new guideline, if you want, to support those principles. In fact, those principles are a subset of the EIF principles, but they are the ones that most convey what we think is needed to check in the legislative proposals. And so we want to ensure that legislative initiatives are ready, are digital ready. And while we are producing these guidelines for drafting legislation, we also recognize the need for screening the proposals, because as you know, legal drafters, they are overwhelmed with a huge set of information, and it's not obvious for them to always go to all the guidelines they have to follow. And for this, and this is the European Commission ecosystem, because we are focusing for now on the European ecosystem, whereas we also mean to not to only to be providing a solution that would fit only for the European Commission. We recognized that the most impact that the screening would have would be if it's done at the legislative preparation phase, in order to allow for efficient collaboration with the IT department that developed the projects and with the IT governance that manage the portfolio of IT solutions. And we also identified that analyzing the corpus of existing legislation, enforced legislation, would be a good, would provide good candidates for become new initiatives in the legislative preparation. But for now, our process is manual. So we perform this screening, and we have a screening team, low staffed, let's say 2.5 people, something like that, that goes to the Better Regulation portal in order to monitor and monitors the list of new initiatives that are popping out, and selects the one that make more sense, where it is visible that ICT would be needed or would is already visible, that it's proposed in the law, and then identifies the research resources. So research resources are information that complements the proposal in order to understand what the proposal is about, and usually it is pointed at in the roadmaps that are coming out for public consultation. So by gathering all the information from the initiative itself and from the referred information, the screening team looks for the criteria that are in fact digging into the principles that I showed in the previous slide, and uses keywords to identify the text, the pieces, extract of text that express interoperability realization or interoperability violation. And in order to support this process, there are exchanges with expert teams and with the policy officers in order to improve the understanding of these legislation, these proposals, because the screening team is not specialized in a policy area. And then once this is done, the set of information gathers allows for an assessment, and where the team will propose for improvement or hints to existing building block or components that could be reused in the policy initiative, and then report it to the policy officer. And to give you an example in this domain, for instance, we had a screening of the postal service legislation where it was not at all looking at the geolocation data or at the INSPIRE directive, which had come with the geolocation data. And we had this proposal to the policy officer, which didn't know about the INSPIRE directive, and considered making use of it in the final proposal. Of course, there are also cases where we do not find the right, while we think something is relevant, and in fact the policy officer tells us, well, you know, because of this and this reason, it's not to be addressed in this initiative. And sometimes it can be that it will be addressed in another initiative, or that it's disregarded because of other the policy context that makes it not relevant. To give more flesh to what I mean with the keywords and the principles, how we test them, here is an example of in the administrative simplification, we want to fight paper-based processes that would be mandated, not fighting the fact that they exist really, but fighting the fact that they would be mandated by law. And there the keywords are paper, page, duplicate, you see. And another example in the case of regulatory reporting is the identification of reporting obligation, where we have a more extensive set of keywords. And you see already from this that indeed this process of manually searching for keywords in a text can be very cumbersome, and not only in a text but in a set of resources. Therefore, we quite fast thought that this was not feasible, not sustainable. So in order to reach a sustainability point, what we did was to screen the number of initiatives that we really assess, but we are in favor of pushing for a screening tool. And what would be the main high-level capabilities of this tool would be the progressive automation of identification of ICT impacts, and to identify also digitalization opportunities, to ensure the collaboration around a screening knowledge base, so all the screened information and the results of the screening to be reused and to be shared, so that users can keep a history of the rationale behind moving in one direction or another. The reuse of the screening findings as input to structuring the content of legislation, and there I'm referring to the LEOS tool, which is now only considering the structure of the legislation, the structure, the article, etc., the legislative structure, but not on the content. And we know, and you also know, that there is a high potential in improving the structuring of the content. For instance, we take sunset clauses. Would they be all streamlined, it would be perfect and brilliant for legislator to draft more easily. Then we also recognize the need for not taking the screening tool as a tool only for us, our little or limited efforts looking at ICT impacts, but we believe that there is a potential of reuse of such a tool in other domains, such as for taking into account sustainability criteria. If you think of the New Deal, the New Green Deal, in fact, it affects all sectors of policy making, and it's quite complex for legislators to follow what is going on in all the sectors and to ensure a consistent approach to reach sustainability. Therefore, we have thought of some use cases, and I wouldn't like to go into the details of those use cases, because I believe that there is really room for discussion around those, and I hope that they can just be used to suggest discussions that we will have in the workshop. And because I'm not sure that, well, I don't have the time. I think it would be too much to discuss them in detail here. But what would be the main benefits of the screening tool? So first, we would have faster, more reliable information to identify resources of interest for shaping policy initiatives. Being from accessing and querying the legislative corpus in force, or by knowing which legislation are of relevance to identify a given initiative, to analyze a given initiative, this would be automating that would be really faster and reliable. And then it would support prioritization, because if you know that there is a high probability that your initiative has a strong connection to ICT and also strong potential violation of interoperability, then it would be easy for a user to first go to those. Then, of course, the user accessing a given automatically screened legislation would have quite an easier work to go to the pieces of text that have been identified by the system, and to push to comment on them, or to modify the results of the machine. But it would be much faster and also systematic, because now as you saw, the list of keywords, we cannot do it manually. Ease of collaboration. So such a tool would for sure allow a much easier collaboration, giving access to everyone to the same information at the same time. I was thinking of a case when a newcomer would join the shaping of a legislative proposal in the middle of the process, and how does he now get all the information? Exchange of mails, usually now it's like this, that it happens that people are sharing mails to give their comments, to change a bit, to edit the files, etc. So this would really ease the process of around the shaping of legislation. And ultimately, the outcome of this would be an enhanced digital readiness of policy initiatives, and also the identification of candidate structured legal content. But of course, don't think it looks easy, but there are challenges, and here you only have some of them that we have been facing. I can say that we started with this last year already, so it's almost 1 year that we have worked on this, and we are still not with a tool. And why? So I depicted the known challenges, and maybe there are not all of them here, following the EIF layer. So organizational. The skills are spread around, or there is a lack of skill in the European Commission. There is a lack of sponsorship. And whereas we are in contact with the head department that is dealing with legislation, lawmaking, and that they are quite conscious and willing to support this, there is not yet the impetus to come with a project with money and budget and people that would directly jump on it. Then there is the resource investment, also considering the potential organizational change where the policy maker would have to screen or to assess himself the digital readiness, would require adaptation in the way cultural adaptation, I guess, which is also not obvious and would require either also training or effort in the change management. From the semantic aspect, so we have seen that configuring the criteria is not something taken for granted. Positive criteria are not so difficult, but even so, if you think, okay, how do I check reusability? Maybe we can see, if we see open data, then we say, okay, they think of reusing, but how do I check non-reusability? And this is not obvious. And for that, we don't have all the answers yet. And it requires also the complexity of rules to reuse information is also something that is not taken for granted, and complexity of rules in general. So the fact that you would refer to in a way to an annex, or you refer to a paragraph or to another legal resource, is something that has quite a variety in the legislative, in the legal drafting. There is a lot of creativity, and it's not very easy. Reuse information in the context of other policy initiatives, like if you have concomitant policy initiatives, how would you use the screening of one for the screening of the other, is something unknown to us yet. And then we also, definition of screening metadata, we have a model, but I'm sure there is room for improvement. And then multilingualism, as we considered using the public consultation resource, so information coming from businesses or citizens or associations is usually in their own national language, and we did not address it, but we know that there are tools on this, but it makes the situation more complex. Then from the technical side, you see that we have very little, and it's because we did not develop the tool yet, and I'm sure we would find a lot of more challenges if we were at developing stage. Now, some ideas. So to foster our discussion, I think that it would be nice to share with you ideas that we had when developing this, to develop the tool. And so first, we thought of reusing existing tools like Ref2Link. We would like to query Cecile. So Cecile is the repository behind the Urlex data, and they have a Sparkle endpoint, and making use of the metadata that is available there gives already a wealth of information that would really facilitate the process and easy have an automated access of search of resources. Then we thought of using our one of our products, which is the core criterion and evidence vocabulary, to define the initial set of n-grams. We thought of that possibly, and it's always thought is a possibility, of store as linked data potential gaps identified. So all the screening information to use screen data and to consider the screening data as metadata that extends the metadata available on the legislative resources. Of course, we were thinking of using NLP techniques, but I'm not a specialist, so I would not go into too far there. And then, of course, we think that it's important that the user input would be used to correct the machine findings and retrain the system on this basis. So these are only ideas, and as we in the legal interoperability team, we are quite new in the domain. We are there since 2 years, around 2 years. We think that it's great to, and also to be faithful to our mission, that is to co-create tools with you. We think it was a very good opportunity to be able to share this with you now in the ReMeP, and to invite you to come to join our Better Legislation for Smoother Implementation community, where we would like to continue the discussion on the topic after the workshop is finished. We are sure you have already thought of such things, and it would be great to have you on board. So thank you very much, and ReMeP again, thanks. I'm finished.
Thank you very much for this presentation, for this inspiring presentation, and for the perspective to have a long-term interaction and discussion later on. I hope we will be able to use and follow this invitation. But now we have still a time of close to an hour to have a brief initial debate within this panel. And I'm quite sure you have already raised a lot of questions that will be put in the course of this debate. But before we really start to interact, we still are looking forward to the introductory statements of our two further panelists. And I would like to start with Fotis. Fotis, you have in Greece also dealt with projects on how to improve lawmaking, on projects related to better regulation, projects making use of new semantic technologies in support of legislation. I know that in a brief introductory statement, you can't give us an overview of all the activities you have undertaken, but perhaps you can select from your activities a few that fit the subject and give us some additional inspiration.
Thank you very much, Dr. Günther Schefbeck, for introducing me to our great community of interested people, a community that is going to grow with time. And this is a certainty that we have while working on the field. And this certainty is based on my initial remark, which is that these technologies and these undertakings, tools in general, are interdisciplinary. So they're not tools that are limited to a certain set of individuals or a little community, a niche community somewhere of lawyers or legislative drafters. There are tools that can be used by a majority of stakeholders, not only drafting, but also assessing the effects of the legislation. So the first key word I would like to state to set my focus on is interdisciplinarity. Now, why is this important? As Cecile said, in the early phases of any such undertaking, development of such a tool, you always need to communicate with engineers, lawyers, constitutionalists, and of course software developers. And the first problem you need to address, issue it needs to be addressed, is how to communicate between one another. So this issue is not to be taken lightly if we want to deliver these tools and to deliver them fast and reliable. We need to be able to communicate at a sufficient level. I will say a few words in my later presentation. The next stage is, as Cecile also commented on, these tools ideally need to be developed not at the union level. They need also to be applicable at all 27 member states and beyond. I'm working on the LEOS solution, and there are not only European member states that are interested into assimilating these new technologies. And for the main reason, for the basic reason, because these technologies are open technologies. So anybody can use them. It doesn't matter that they were developed with European taxpayers' money. Anybody in the world can reuse them. So reusability is in there. And the third, also very important from the parliamentary point of view, point is, Cecile often talked about assessing these, assessing legal texts for for finding information about the state of ICT, how to tackle ICT challenges in there. On the Parliament, on the contrary, we do not deal with primarily with the making of legislation, although the Parliament is a legislative body. Primarily, the Parliament has a heavy mandate into questioning the government, so it has a mandate ex post, so after the voting of the legislation. And then, again, these semantic metadata that will be gathered through these processes, as Cecile explained, will be very important for the lawmakers, or let's say for the members of the parliaments and their staff, to assess how these laws were made and whether these laws are that were developed to be fit for purpose, whether this is still the case a few years after. And to close my short remark, kindly note that one of the most heavily developed sectors of parliamentary evolution, innovation at the moment is the post-legislative scrutiny sector. So if we can develop such tools, if we can make their information and the added value that they create, if we can create open data sets with this information, then not only lawmakers and policymakers will be helped, will be supported, but also society as a whole, through parliaments, through the strengthening of parliamentary control function. Thank you.
Thank you, Fotis. The next speaker, the next presenter, is Karl Irresberger, who, as I initially mentioned, is responsible and has been responsible for legislative drafting in the Austrian Federal Chancellery for many years. And he has also been responsible for developing the guidelines regulating legislative drafting and also regulating the assessment of the impact of legal regulations. among them, and that was why I initially wanted to refer to the state of the art, so to say, in Austria. Among these guidelines, there is also a set of guidelines to measure the ICT fitness, if I may put it this way, of legislation. A set of guidelines that have already been put in place in 2012 for the first time, and that was renewed and adapted to the GDPR last year. Perhaps you can tell us a bit more about the state of the art in Austria.
Yes, gladly, Mr. Schefbeck. May I say first that I find it quite interesting, the idea of the project of Mrs. Guasch to have a tool that analyzes certain corpus of legislative texts, both draft and existing legislation, which requires the existence of a good database. And I think we have a good database, but not perfect. So there is no database where you find all the drafts of both parliamentary laws and ministerial regulations, by the way. But to speak of my own work and experience, so my daily work is not making guidelines. Making guidelines occasionally belongs to my work, but giving opinions during consultation procedures regarding such draft laws and regulation makes a large part of my daily business. And may I just mention very briefly what the sort of guidelines and tools we do have and also we do not have. So there are different tools. One is comparable to LIAS, which was mentioned, which supports drafting and especially layouting. And it is as many of our tools, it is designed to support and to sometimes in a nasty way give guidance to drafters. And it is when people point us to LIAS, our software developers say our system is much more elaborated, so we cannot learn anything from LIAS. But it's in a way from the purpose, it's comparable. Also, there is a set of guidelines and even regulations on impact assessment. And this, for example, therefore, for many so-called dimensions such as environment and public expenses and so on, there are different guidelines, and there is a tool which supports and guides the drafters through the composition of an impact assessment, also providing data which may be required, but not all of them, of course. And so one philosophy of ours is not just drafting guidelines, because the experience is that they are little read and little obeyed, but to complement them with tools. And some of these tools are so perfect that people do not need and do not care to read the underlying guidelines. And this works quite well, I may state. Part of our guidelines is the one Mr. Schefbeck has highlighted, is to speak ICT Fitness Guidelines, which were not created under my aegis, unfortunately, but they are not bad for that reason. They deal with with do's and don'ts in the context of digitization. For example, in the citizen to government communication to avoid terms that imply the use of payment, for example. So it is one of the do's is to enable digital communication from the citizen to government, but also the other way around. And there is a set of recommendations drafted to that aim. Also giving hints as regards data protection and the use of shared services, and the most user-friendly tool is a checklist of the whole corpus of guidelines, giving questions and brief comments as to what should be made in the context of digital fitness of legislation. Yes, may I should have mentioned this earlier, but one of the tools which are proudest of, but is not yet finished, is a tool for automatically creating amendments out of text with track changes, and there is a tool making a complete amending directive or something like that from a text containing track changes. So I think this is all for the purposes of an overview of what have been our experiences and our achievements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you've already now learned a lot about the subject from different perspectives, but of course there are still a lot of questions to be discussed. And I'd like to start with a question to Mrs. Guasch. We have been talking so much about tools, and as Karl Ellsberger put it rightly, often it's the most simple tools, the simplest tools like checklists that are most helpful and most successful. So you have been working on your tool for a year now, as you told us, and as you put it, it's not yet finished, and you are still working on it. So can you already give us a brief outline or a brief perspective how your tool will look like? What kind of environment it will be? What kind of functionalities it will offer to the user?
Well, so the idea is the checklist, we also have the checklist in the better regulation toolbox, and we are precisely revising that now and to be available, I think by September, if I'm not mistaken, well, it's under the umbrella of Secretariat Général of the European Commission. So we are just providing our input to this revision of the better regulation toolbox. And the idea is that we did not work extensively on the user interface yet, because we thought that it was more important to make sure that first that the need was there. And I was very happy to hear from Mr. From Fotis, sorry, it's easier, and from our panelists that it would have an interest. This is one very important information, and then of course it could be now, but I'm speaking as I'm thinking, that we could see it as that the checklist that is structured into the toolbox would be filled in automatically by the system, and then that the user would have to complement or to change the result provided by the system. This is a very likely possibility. I don't know if I answer the question, but
partly.
Okay.
So, if I may still keep to the issue of the tool, you gave us a few hints about what methodological approaches you will apply. My impression was that it's not a surprise. Legal regulations normally are not built by algorithms. They are built by text. So it's text-based information. So there is a lot of text mining, natural language processing, obviously, in the methodological approaches you are mentioning. But you are also referring to the fact that it's easier to detect certain concepts or terms in a text than to detect the concepts that are missing.
Yes.
So in what way do you address this issue? Will you have background ontologies that will serve as something like a backlog to check new draft regulations against? What's the approaches?
Yeah, so I can give for some aspects of this, I can give answers already. For instance, first, a very simple thing would be to consider antonyms of in the simple way. Huh? And then it's also to link so this is a first approach that I'm sure will be implemented. But then a second one is also to consider slight variations into concepts, but domain concepts. And this is now we are working or collaborating with the DG FISMA, which is financial DG, finance and market. I don't remember which acronym it is meant for, which is progressing in the domain of semantic or elaborate semantic search. So first identifying the concepts of regulatory reporting, and this by the keywords that are partially what I shared with you in the slides, and then going deeper into the domain specific aspects to see to have the set of concepts that are required to be reported as regulatory mandated by law. So the information that is requested to businesses, this, in order to have it streamlined, you need to make sure that you do not create a very similar concept that just overrides or creates a variation that creates a burden, you see? So it goes into this direction that once this project is finished, the idea is to make it reusable in other contexts, because now it's domain specific for FISMA. But of course, so when we go to the...
Sorry, I have lost the connection to...
I see you. Can you hear me?
Most of the panel.
We hear you. Do other people? Okay, so I think it's Günther who cannot hear us. Well, I continue. I hope
it would be now my appeal to the editorial.
So I continue maybe while
Actions.
Günther is okay. So now we lost two of them, so there is a problem, I guess.
Well, they are rebooting. You can continue, I suppose, with your answer.
Okay, so now I'm a bit lost. So I was saying that this is one part of investigation, and in that thread as well, so there are connections between different ways of referring to legislation. Now for more complex, so this is already very complex, and it requires a hell of bright minds that are working on this. But it's true that, well, we were also thinking, to give another example, of using ontologies like the Ira ontology. Ira, it is not yet there, and that's why I was not taking this as the first example, but Ira is the European Interoperability Reference Architecture. And if you think of using this to design and to define your solutions and having it as an ontology, it would mean that the legal building blocks are connected to all the other building blocks. And then would you change, for instance, a legislation, create an amendment, you would be able to query in what it relates to other to the solution that is behind, and also to the components possibly that are behind. But now I am very enthusiastic about this. But for now, the IRA, well, I don't know how much it is used. So it is first, it's not an ontology yet, and it would require that existing IT landscape in all member states would be migrated to this ontology, which is also something that is not taken for granted, or would require some effort. So I am enthusiastic, but I'm not sure it will work out. But to tell you the truth, when I am assessing legislation, I am going to the internal. So in the Commission, we are using the IRA to document the trans-European systems that have an impact on member states, and I'm looking at the information there to see how it is affected by a new proposal. So I'm doing that, but manually as well. Okay, and then I think I'm now that Günther is back, I'm finished with my answer.
Finally back. So now I missed your elaborate
yes, but
contribution.
I can make a small summary if you want. So
a small summary. Everything is recorded. I can have a look at it afterwards, but a small summary would be nice.
Okay, so I mentioned several threads. So one of them is the thread to reuse existing stuff that is ongoing in DG FISMA, where they are analyzing the concepts, domain concepts around regulatory reporting, and to extend this this approach to wider use in other domains. Then another thread that I discussed was to use the IRA ontology. So IRA is the European Interoperability Reference Architecture. And now it's not yet an ontology, but it is on the verge to become, let's say. And so it documents all the building blocks from the thinking of the EIF layer to know how a solution, an interoperable European solution, is relating to the legislative building blocks, organizational, technical building blocks, taking the applications and infrastructure. And what I was saying to Fotis, who was the only participant left, was that in fact when I am assessing new initiatives, I am using this information, but not yet in a tool that is also available on JoinUp, by the way, to check if there is a change in one initiative, how it affects the services, so the organizational public services that are behind, and IT applications, the tools that are behind, or the services, the IT services that are behind. And I'm doing that on information that has been built in the CAR-tool, in the test cartography of the trans-European systems that have been documented also by the ISA Square program. But of course, it's not extensive. It's only taking into account a limited set of solutions that are the ones that the Commission provides to support these policies, to or the part that is trans-European, if you want. So I was telling that I believe that it's on one side, I'm quite enthusiastic about this idea to be able to assess the impact from accessing this information as that would be available ideally as open link data, and to query this information while we are touching or drafting or elaborating a new policy initiative, but it requires to make sure that the data is available, and this is not such an easy thing. And I said something else, but now I forgot, so maybe Fotis can tell me. I don't, wait.
Well, no problem. Fotis, you had your débat séparé with Cecile. I envy you for it. But now you have learned more than we have about what the new tools will be able to deliver. So is this what you had in mind? Initially, you made the statement that this kind of tools is something that not only the European institutions would need, also the national parliaments, or even other institutions doing regulatory business in some way or the other. There is so much regulation on so many different levels. And in all these regulatory environments, tools like this might be required. Is this what these other levels of legislation or regulation, to formulate it in a more abstract way, would need?
Well, Günther, this comes very close. You see what Cecile or the Commission at large is working on is very is considered to be, the holy grail of the evolution of legislation. I mean, if you have semantic interoperability, then you can't bring it more farther. I mean, this is everything. If you have data first legal text there, and you have it annotated with semantic metadata, then everything is there for anybody technically that can read these kind of data. Everything is there to understand and to work with. Third-party applications could be based on such data. Algorithmic processing could be done with artificial intelligence on such data sets. But let me go a few steps back and present, if I may, our standpoint, being a small unicameral parliament. You see, parliaments like the Hellenic one around the world lack the massive technical capacity to develop systems like that on their own. I suppose the Austrian example is among the unique ones, that you have gone without any underlying standards. You have gone there and you have developed your own facility, IT system, which is quite remarkable, as a matter of fact. But if I know parliaments well enough, you can't duplicate it often. This makes the work of the Commission even more important in terms that they have the capacity and they have the expertise, and they have the money to provide with open source solutions that others can configure and reuse. So this is the case where we are now. So we have screened all this ISA 2 landscape, and we have tried to find, well, what can we take, what can we pick from there, cherry pick, so that we can use as a proof of concept to persuade our political leadership. Because it's not, it doesn't matter if I can understand or if I'm enthusiastic about this, or even if I can install it on my personal computer and it runs. It doesn't bring the system further. So we need to persuade our leaders at the parliament, at the, let's say, at the general secretariat of the government, the two national entities, that they have to work together for legislation to come from the ministerial side to the parliament side. So, and what we have found is the LEOS tool. Now, and we have tried successfully with our team to install it and starting experimenting with it. Now, as mentioned, this tool and other tools that are being developed at the central level as open source software applications. Now they're primarily designed for the European level, so they can handle on the basis of a Komantoso of the standard, which is called a Komantoso. It's an XML standard. The tool can understand European legislation. So the first basic step as a country that we need to make is to develop our own ontologies and transform and create a subset of a Komantoso, like European Union has done with a Komantoso for EU, so that we can write our laws, or better said, so that the laws through the tools can be exported in a form that is in machine readable and it is open. So this means that we need to configure and to set up internally our system. This is very easy to say, and it's basic understanding, but it's very hard to do. So what did we do? So the approach that I have taken is I try to persuade the National School of Government to create a pilot program to educate new generations of public administrators. Because, as said, it doesn't matter if a few people in the administration understand what it is and how it can be put into work. It needs to be operated in an interdisciplinary matter by people that are not necessarily IT experts. So the approach we have taken, and I'm very proud to say that the first class of this innovative lab that we have created at the National School of Governance has been finalized just a couple of days ago. And we are at the process of evaluating what exactly we have done. Was this now successful or not, or somewhere in the middle? I hope that we will be able to have such empirical data to study in the next months. So this is one first generic approach to create a pool of experts. You could also say you could create a community of people across several disciplines to work with these new tools. Cecile tries to propagate it. You try to create this. We hope that we can duplicate this effort at the national level, so that we can also offer to you our pool to contribute to the common good. Now a second, and I will finish this contribution for the moment. A second and very important issue is, now that we have understood how we can tackle roughly the matter, who does the work? Who works on that? As said, parliaments usually lack the technical capacity to do this reconfiguration, repurposing of the original tools, or to develop new ones. So what I did, and it's already 2 years that we're attempting this, I created a scientific crowdsourcing platform. So I invited people across the public administration, across academia and public sector and private sector, including science research centers and so on. to join this effort, to create these tools and to understand the new tools, and to and try to, as good as possible, try and as quick as possible, try to introduce these tools into the into public administration. This team, I call it Hellenic OCR team, because it was created originally to conduct OCR on non-digitized texts. It was quickly transformed into a very wide platform for digital transformation of public administration. We work on these tools and solutions for 2 years now, and gradually we start producing scientific outputs that are quite significant, not only for the Hellenic Parliament, but also in the wider context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fotis. So I'd like to give the floor to Karl Irresberger now. We've seen there are these two construction sites that we have to build on. On the one hand, it's the tools that we have to develop. But on the other hand, at the same time, and interlinked with the tools that we have to develop, there's the human resources, the human capacity that we also have to work on, that we also have to build. So I would like to ask you two questions. First, there was a question that was already put in the chat and that you have already answered, namely a question related to tools. What tools are we still lacking? What tools are still missing? And you briefly already answered this question by referring to more intelligent tools. But perhaps you can describe a bit more the intelligence that these tools need to have. But then there is this other construction site. There is the site where we have to build human capacity. And you at the Administrative Academy of the Austrian Federation or Federal Services have already initiated a program to improve the legislative drafting skills of the drafters. So perhaps you can a bit elaborate on both aspects, on the tools that are still missing and on the human capacities that you are intending to build.
Thank you. Well, this touches a difficult question. So undoubtedly in Austria, as in many legislations, there is quite some room for improvement as to the quality of legislation in many aspects, such as fact-based policies, such as using appropriate language, such as applying certain skills of lawmaking. And one key problem is schooling of drafters, which is more a desire than a fact, because drafting is dispersed over virtually all ministries, and in the ministries over a number of departments and divisions, and lawmaking is not the main responsibility of many law drafters. So you can imagine that attending courses specifically dealing with making and drafting of laws is not the main concern of these people and these ministries. So what we emphasized from the beginning. So I hold classes once a year, and there are between 20 and 40 attendants to give a certain impression. And we have 2 days in which we deal question of legal technique essentially. And there are other classes dealing with impact assessment and language and so on. So one approach is providing schooling for drafters and would-be drafters, and the other ones providing guidelines of what to make. And as I mentioned, just guidelines are not really taken care of. They are not read. It's difficult to put them into practice. So the emphasis went to creating tools which might supply the providing other possibilities of improving legislation. And these tools have their merits, but they are not as intelligent as a human would be. So just giving the example of language. So there are quite a lot of challenges to using proper language in laws. They should use precise terminology, and they should be understandable to the general public, if possible, as well. So this is almost impossible to reconcile these two requirements. But there could be a tool pointing drafters, and I know this is an example from Germany. So they have a tool that rings if a sentence is becoming too long. So this is a modest example of what would be desirable, because it is a curse of lawmaking and of writing legal text that clauses become too long and too complicated. So this would be an even modest but possible approach. Also, so we have a small tool which points to undesired expressions. So sometimes there are colloquial but not appropriate expressions. So we have a tool that points to such undesirable words. So this is modest, but one could imagine much more as regards use of established terminology, of pointing to existing good examples for if the software notices what the drafter is thinking about. So this would be the main challenge, and so we are already far from that. We do not have such tools which would both support and direct the lawmaking when the drafter is more or less in action.
Thank you. So we have just 6 minutes remaining, and still a lot of questions that would be interesting to be discussed. Like, for example, the multilingualism issue that has been briefly mentioned, like the issue of ex ante and ex post regulatory impact assessment that has been mentioned by Fotis. So I'm afraid that in this remaining time we won't be able to even to deal with this this set of questions even in a very rough manner. So I would like to devote the time remaining to the question: how can we proceed? Cecile, you invited us initially to join your initiative. Perhaps you can make use of your to get into a bit more detail about the way that we could interact, about the tasks that could be performed in such an interaction, and about the fora that would be available to have this interaction and this collaboration, if I may say so, in the field of further developing human capacities and tools.
Okay, thank you very much. So first, I already mentioned that we have, as a forum, we propose to have the better legislation for smoother implementation community that is already available. You can go there and register. I think that it would be great from my part. So for me, it was fantastic to have your input from the panel now, to see that there were more use cases, that more benefits of the tool. So I think also in my capacity of business architect, it's important. So when I recognize a need that I did not think of, then I'm eager to investigate it further, to make sure that the tool would be available to cater for such those needs. So gathering your needs to all of you would be very good. So in this discussion that is now open on our platform, then I'm also thinking that as we have the IOP Academy, but for that I'm talking with cautiously, because it involves other. So now also, in fact, for this, but I'm sure my colleagues in the legal interoperability team, they agree with what I just mentioned. So we can gather needs and then also investigate further other means to. So if we have semantic experts, maybe they will come with ideas we did not think of. So all to propose things, and we would be there to moderate and gather, make something consistent out of all these this input. And further, so I was thinking that it would be nice to explore the possibility to use the Interoperability Academy to develop skills, as you were mentioning that there are lack of skills, but for that we need then to have discussion outside of this session to make sure that the people, the officers responsible of this action would agree and would take on this possibility. But I guess they would, but okay, we have to explore. Now, what should I... Is it enough, sufficient for you, or I can develop more? Maybe, I don't know.
I'm quite sure. I'm afraid we are running out of time. We just have 2 minutes remaining. But thank you very much for this little introduction into future collaboration. I'm quite sure that our panelists have got inspired by your invitation and will follow it. I will, for sure. And I also hope that among the audience that have followed our discussion online, there will be many people that also have got this feeling of inspiration to join your initiative and to deliver to you their ideas and their issues and their problems, and perhaps even some approaches for possible solutions. So I very much hope that from this debate that we had here within the framework of ReMeP 2020, we will only get a certain boost to start into future collaboration in the field of developing better tools and better human capacities in the field of regulatory impact assessment in general and ICT, checking the ICT fitness of legislation in particular. I have been asked by the organizers to close this session by referring to, first, the fact that now there is a break which can be made use of for networking, and networking here in particular would mean to pay visits to the virtual booth of the sponsors of the conference and have a look at their offers and opportunities. And then at 4:45, so in 15 minutes from now, there will be the fireside chat. I'm very curious how virtual fire will look like. So I hope you will join the conference again at the fireside chat 4:45. My final obligation is to thank everybody, to thank the audience for following the debate that we had together here on the panel. Of course, in particular, my gratitude has to be given to the panelists, to Karl Irresberger, Fotis, Fitsilis, and of course, in particular, to the initial presenter, Cecile Guasch, who has given us so much inspiration for future thoughts. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thank you.